Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I'm your host, Rex Bear, and tonight's guest is Dr. Paul Byrne. Dr. Paul Byrne is just a bounty of knowledge. He has an amazing website called the lifeguardianfoundation.org, and what we discuss in this podcast is very powerful information that Big Pharma and the medical industrial complex does their very best to suppress. He talks about different terms that have been created by the medical industrial complex to get people's organs when they're still alive. Make sure to check out lifeguardianfoundation.org. Also subscribe to youtube.com/clandestine time lord. You'll get access to a bounty of podcasts as well. Go to leakproject.com, become a member at Leak Project, get access to exclusive content. Be the change you want to see. This is Rex Bear. Talk to you soon. Well, folks, we have a real treat for you tonight. We have Dr. Paul A. Byrne with us from lifeguardianfoundation.org. Dr. Byrne, it's a real honor to speak with you today here at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
I am fine. Glad to speak with you.
It's great to speak with you, too. Now, I've had several guests that I've spoken to before that have kind of hinted on this subject, but you are the expert, and I really want to hear what we can do to protect ourselves. Now, I have also heard of there being some very powerful people that kind of have like a catalog of sorts where they can look through, and if they need an organ or if they need blood or something, they can pick and choose from these like basically clandestine files that they pay big bucks for. Have you ever found anything like that to be accurate, or is that more internet woo-woo?
Well, I don't really hear too much about that, and while I hear it from you now, I really don't put much credibility to it, and so, part of why I do not is that the first thing, in order to get an organ for transplantation, it has to be a healthy organ. It cannot come from a cadaver, and the organ has to continue to be healthy during the time that they're operating to take it out, during the time that they have it out, until it gets into someone else. And so there are many, many things that can damage the organ during that time. And so when you start thinking about all of that, how much care and concern there has to be to take care of the donor, to take care of the organ before it's taken out of the living person, than to keep it healthy until they get it into another living person. And so to do this in such a way that it would be clandestine does really not make a whole lot of sense to me. But on the other hand, a lot of things happen, and so perhaps it goes on. While that could be very, very important, what's going on that's more important is the organ transplant industry that is thriving and just moving along very well in the United States, all over the world, really. And so ordinary folks need to know how it affects them, or how it possibly affects them or affects their family. So I tend to stay focused on what's really happening to everyone, whether they're aware of it or not, and not pay too much attention to some of those other things that we might hear about.
Well, I can certainly appreciate that, and that's one thing I bring up many times on the Leak Project is the internet's like a bathroom wall, but worse. You can write anything about anyone on there, but I'm looking at an article from 2009, actually, that came out on Newsweek that says organ trafficking is no myth. And you've heard the urban legends, I'm sure, where somebody goes out to a bar, they wake up in a bathtub with a bunch of ice and one of their kidneys is missing or something. And I've thought to myself, man, that's got to be really, I don't know, but there's some crazy people out there. But let's get into the meat and the potatoes and the real situation here with these organ companies that just probably make tremendous amounts of money and find ways to manipulate the situation to get more profits.
Yes. Well, before you go away from that scenario about getting intoxicated, you didn't use quite the words, but you said going to a bar, and then waking up in a bathtub full of ice and minus a kidney. I think that's right next to BS. The kidneys are not just lying there underneath the skin, waiting for somebody's hand to reach in and pick it out.
Right.
And in order to get that kidney out, it has to be dissected. It has a blood supply with arteries. If you can just, even for a tiny, tiny little bit, imagine maybe even a garden hose or that would get away from someone, how it might flop around and lots of water pour out of it, but quit and hurry. How about if you got a heart pumping that blood? And so to dissect the artery and the vein and the ureter, that's pretty sophisticated kind of dissection. And I'm just not impressed with stories about how that gets done on somebody's kitchen table or something. But on the other hand, I have so many things that I have to pay attention to, but I'm just I don't know where those stories start from. Maybe they're true, but on the other hand, I'm skeptical of the truth of those kind of stories. But anyway, let's go ahead with the things that we do have to deal with. Yes, organ transplant industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's completely dependent on getting healthy organs. And where do they get healthy organs? They get healthy organs from living persons. Can they get healthy organs from a cadaver? No. The donor must be alive. Every organ that's transplanted is a healthy organ. It comes from a living person. And then to distinguish just a little bit, there is a bit of difference between organs and tissues, and the organs carry out a function, and they have to have a continual blood supply. Tissues are such that some of them do not require that same kind of blood supply, like the cornea, the front part of the eye. Fact is, the cornea, the front part of the eye, doesn't have a blood supply. It gets its oxygen through the tears from the environment. So one can see that after circulation has stopped, the cornea doesn't deteriorate immediately. It takes a longer time, like the heart without circulation deteriorates in 4 or 5 minutes, whereas the cornea can take several hours. So they can get the cornea for transplantation after circulation has stopped. They get other things like ligaments and tendons. You can readily understand that ligaments and tendons need oxygen, but they don't have that continual supply of oxygen, and so they can get, and those would be tissues, not organs. And the organs that are transplanted are heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, pancreas, intestine. All of those are organs that need a continual supply of oxygen, and so they have to get them from living persons. When they first started to do transplantation, they focused on hearts early. It wasn't the earliest, but they focused on hearts, and they tried to get heart for transplantation after circulation stopped, after death. And they quickly learned that it wasn't successful. They couldn't do it. So there was a doctor, Christian Bernard, who was a bit more aggressive, trained in the United States, and then went back to Johannesburg. And his going away present when he left the United States was a heart-lung machine. And so he wanted to do a heart transplant. Doctors here in the United States wanted to do it too. But Christian Bernard did the first heart transplant in December of 1967. And there was much publicity. He attained great notoriety over it, and did the heart transplant, and got it from a person that he would like to say quickly after death, but one has to realize that the heart without circulation, just 4 or 5 minutes, is so damaged that that it isn't any good for transplantation quickly. So, and to get to the heart and take it out, it takes about an hour of operating. So he had to have everything opened up, ready to lift the heart out, and did whatever he did. And so the word went around the world, the news around the world, that the first heart transplant had been done. Well, the second heart transplant was done 3 days later, and it was done in Brooklyn, New York. And what they did in Brooklyn, New York, is they cut the beating heart out of a 3-day-old baby who was said to have mental retardation, and transplanted it into an 18-day-old baby who had something wrong with the heart, but the brain was okay, and so they determined was more entitled to a heart than the infant with mental retardation. So they transplanted the heart, and at the end of their procedures, both babies were dead. It was illegal and it was immoral, and so they had to find a way to get hearts for transplant. So what they did is they set up a committee at Harvard, and the Harvard committee set up what's known as the Harvard criteria, and for brain death, and they published it in 1968. Within a few months of those first heart transplants, published it in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And the title of the article was "A Definition of Irreversible Coma." Now, coma is a word that's spelled pretty close to the word comma, and comma as a punctuation means a pause. Coma is like that too. It's somebody who's unconscious, unresponsive, but they're not dead. They're alive. If they were dead, they would just call them dead. So a definition of irreversible coma, and it was new in medicine in the United States. And the way we doctors make inventions and progress in medicine is that we do things in the laboratory, in the chemistry laboratory or biology laboratory, and then we use dogs or cats or rats to evaluate treatment before we use them on human beings. And then when we do use them on human beings, we use them on a small number of human beings to determine the effect and that kind of thing, and then expand it out from there. Well, what they did with brain death is they just had a committee at Harvard, and the Harvard committee invented it. They didn't do any studies on dogs or cats or rats. They didn't do any studies on human beings. They just made up the criteria, which became known as the Harvard criteria, and that's how it started. And that was in 1968. And between 1968 and 1978, over the next 10 years, there were 30 different sets of criteria that were published. Everyone was different. None of them are based on any more science than the first one, the first set of criteria. They all tended to become less strict than the previous ones. And you can understand a bit about the decrease in strictness. The Harvard criteria required that the patient be in whatever condition that was for 24 hours before they could declare them brain dead. And what they did is they shortened the time to 12 hours, and then to 6 hours, and then to 3 hours, and then to 1 hour. And there's one set of criteria that's published in the Cleveland Clinic Quarterly where they can take the patient off the ventilator for 30 to 60 seconds. And if there's no evidence of the patient taking a breath, that becomes the signal to get the beating heart cut out. And so brain death is just an invention. It's an invention to get organs for transplantation from living persons, and they just make up this thing. They use words like brain death, which is really brainwashing. It's really fake death. It's not true death. And it was just made up to get organs for transplantation. And when they published the Harvard criteria in that initial article in JAMA in 1968, they included the fact that they wanted to legalize this. And so they embarked on legalizing it, and the JAMA article was 1968. Kansas was the first state to get a brain death law in 1970. And of course, all the states have a brain death law, and they're all pretty similar. They build into them two different ways to be declared dead. And one way is through this brain death method, and the other way has to do with cessation of respiration and circulation, and that. So two different ways to declare death. And of course, if you have in there in the law, if you have it's either one or two, then of course you could have both. And so the law builds into it three different ways to be dead, and then the determination is made in accordance with accepted medical standards. And I already told you there were three different sets of criteria, whether you call them standards or not, but three different sets of criteria published in the first 10 years of this movement to get organs for transplantation. And they were all different. So you see, the law has built into it at least 33 different ways to be dead. And you can be declared dead by one way, but you would still be alive if by the use of a different set of criteria. So that's how all of this got started to get organs. Do you have any questions at this point?
I do. Do you have the names of the companies that are actually making the big bucks off of people's organs?
Sure. It's the transplant doctors, the transplant hospitals. It's all organized by the federal government. The federal government, of course, sets up different organizations for carrying out their different activities, but the money is all there. Obviously, there are companies that get involved with equipment and that kind of thing. But the one article that I read a number of years ago was that 60% of medical school budgets revolve around organ transplantation, and so it's a big part of medicine, and so the organ. There are about 60 organ procurement organizations in the United States. I don't know what their salary is of the organ procurement organizer, but whatever number you want to put on that, and then you start multiplying it, the first thing you know, you get a pretty big number just for organ procurement organizer, just for the directors of it, not saying anything about all the other people that go along with it and are part of it. So it's lots of money. Where's the money come from? We know that the much of the funding comes from Medicare, and the history of how that occurred was that when Medicare was invented in 1964, it did take care of people over 65 that had kidney disease. So then some of the people who had kidney disease that were under 65 said, gosh, I would like some of that special treatment and money and the like. And so Medicare started to take care of patients with kidney disease. And then what occurred was that dialysis is expensive, and sometimes when people have kidney disease, they'll get a kidney transplant. So they started to look at how much it costs for dialysis, and found out that once somebody was on dialysis, the cost of it for about 3 years was about the same as the cost for transplantation. And so that's the history of how Medicare started to pay for transplants. And then, of course, it's spread out now to where Medicare is involved with the payment for transplantation for many of the transplants. It's not the only way. One man that I talked to fairly often told me that his daughter-in-law had received a liver transplant, and he told me that the total bills for the doctors in the hospital for transplantation of his daughter-in-law's liver was $1.4 million. And so I asked where that came from, and he said that they had contributed $20,000 themselves, and then the private insurance company, and then Medicare. And that's how it all got paid for, at least in that situation. Yes, money's a major part of it. From my own vantage point, I know some of the things that I've said because I've had to learn them, but that's not how I got into this subject. I'm a neonatologist, and I'm actually one of the founders of the field of neonatology. I started a special care nursery at Cardinal Glennon Children's Hospital in 1963, and at that time, I reviewed the statistics at two of the hospitals in St. Louis, and over a 3-year period, there were no survivors of babies less than 3 pounds and 4 ounces who had trouble with breathing. There was an occasional baby who would survive that didn't have trouble with breathing, but if they had trouble with breathing, they all died. It was 100% mortality. And so with that, I embarked on starting a special care nursery without, there was no treatments, essentially no treatments that were known. We just give them sugar water in the vein, counteract their acidosis with some bicarbonate, and basically watch them. And we would see them every day and ask ourselves, what can we do next? And so that's how we began. But when we began, we didn't have any ventilators for babies. They had to be invented, and the ventilators that had to be invented had to be very sensitive, very gentle, because little babies are not big and strong and powerful. So we had to have equipment for them. And the interesting thing about the ventilators that weren't invented for babies, the principles of those ventilators are used in everyone, older children and adults who are getting on the ventilator. In fact, the matter is, they're pretty much the same ventilators now that are infants and adults. That there's not a whole lot of difference in them. Obviously, volumes and pressures are a bit different, but the sensitivity of the requirement for the baby is applied to everyone who gets a ventilator, and it's just one of the examples of how it affects everyone. What we did for babies. Another example is that micro technique for analyzing blood. That when we started, there was a requirement of a large quantity of blood to do any analysis on blood, but little babies don't have large quantities of blood. So micro technique had to be invented and developed to do blood tests on babies, and it's that same micro technique that's used to analyze blood on all of us. Yes, when we go to have blood drawn, they'll still draw it in a tube, but they only use a tiny, tiny bit of that blood because that's all it's required is a tiny bit of blood, because the technique had to be invented to analyze the blood for the babies. The babies only had small amounts of blood. So it's just an overt example of how, because a group of doctors saw that little babies died and there were no treatments, we embarked on trying to figure out how to treat the babies better and how it not only helped the babies, but also helps all of us. One of the things that I did during that time was that we did not have a way to take blood pressure on premature babies. And we were in St. Louis, where the McDonnell Douglas Corporation still is, but I think has a different name now. But the McDonnell Douglas Corporation had a lot to do with the development of the space capsule. And so when there was a news and article in the Sunday paper about the space capsule. I wrote a letter to Mr. McDonald and said, "Dear Mr. McDonald, you're putting men in space, flying them around the world, and I'm here in St. Louis. I don't have a way to do blood pressure on premature babies. Can you help me?" And he sent me 2 electronic engineers, and we took the blood pressure cuff that was used on the finger of the astronaut, moved it up to the arm of the premature baby, and invented the way to take blood pressure on babies. And that cuff that was used on the finger of the astronaut and then moved up to the arm of the baby, it's that cuff, similar cuff, that's a plastic cuff that's used to take blood pressure on all children, infants and children. And so it's just an interesting little thing. And so I told you I started to do these things in 1963, and at 1975, what happened is I had a baby who was born very prematurely and needed a lot of treatment and care. And several weeks after he was born, he would lay there. He was on a ventilator. He wouldn't move. He wouldn't do anything. And we did a brainwave test, and his brainwaves were flat. And what's written on his chart is consistent with cerebral death. So death was written on his chart, and the neurologist said, "Well, repeat it." So we did in a couple of days, and it was unchanged from the previous one. And so then we asked, "Well, what do we do now?" And the answer was, "Well, in some places they turn off the ventilator and stop treating them." And I said, "Well, I don't do that. I treat little babies. Some live, some die, but I treat them." And so I kept treating Joseph. Eventually, he did get off the ventilator, and he did go to school, and he did get good grades. He ran track and played baseball, and he's married, has 3 children. And so Joseph was the patient that caused my beginning to study the question of brain death. And it took several years till I understood the language that they were using. And then the question is brain death true death? And it became clear to me that it is not true death, and it still is not true death. Brain death is fake death. It's just made up, first of all, to get organs. And of course, what happens is that they want to get the organs, but if they can't get the organs, then they try not to waste money on people and stop the ventilator so that they become truly dead quickly. And so brain death is fake death. It's not true death. It's observations on a patient to so that it becomes the signal to do something else that makes them dead. They're never dead. Everybody who's called brain dead is alive. But the brain death is a signal to do something else that makes the patient become dead. How do they become dead? They get their beating heart cut out, they're dead. Every time a heart transplant is done, it's a beating heart that's cut out and transplanted into someone else. Every time a heart transplant is done, the donor is killed. And you will only hear about the good things of organ transplantation. And there are a lot of good things, and we get excited because somebody continues to live after they have received an organ, and rightly so, happy that person's alive. But it's also necessary to look at the person that they took the organ from. And every time an organ is transplanted, it's a healthy organ that comes from a living person. And after the organ or the organs are taken, the living person is either dead or at least weaker than he was before. And so that's what brain death or fake death was all about. It's to get organs or to stop treating people who are very sick. Now, do you have any questions?
Oh, yeah, I do. And this is just some great information. Much appreciated. Have you been able to find out, I know you gave us the amount of monies that one person had to pay for that transplant, but is there a ballpark on what some of these major organs can pick up with these companies? Are they getting 100 grand for a heart and 75 grand for a kidney, or is that something that is not readily available, that information?
No, you can get information like that, and you will get numbers like that. It's to say 100,000 is a nice round number, and it becomes plus or minus 25 once you start getting in different organs, that kind of thing. Yes, big money is involved in the organ transplant industry. It's said that a person's organs are worth about $1 million, and then one I saw the other day said the person's organs are worth about $5 million, and so somebody who's unconscious and on a ventilator, and especially if they're were otherwise healthy and they're 40 or under, 40 years or younger, their organs are very valuable, and they want their organs for transplantation.
If they're making so much money off of these organ transplants, and then they make money off the medications that person has to take for the rest of his life to have that organ that's not originally his, right? Why do they have to take so many different medications? I mean, what are those designed to do?
Well, the way we're all made is that our organs are made just for us and not for anyone else. And so if you transplant an organ to someone else, then the recipient tries to reject the organ because it's foreign to their body. So in order to keep that organ, medications that are anti-rejection medicine has to be taken for the most part for the rest of their life. There are a few people that somehow or another the body adjusts to it, but not very many. For all intents and purposes, it's for the rest of their life. And then getting back to the thing that I told you about the transplant of kidneys, and Medicare pays for the anti-rejection medicine, but for 3 years, and then after that, they don't pay for it. Recipients of the organs have to find some other source of funding for their anti-rejection medicine, or they reject the kidney that they got, and of course, then they become candidate to get another kidney, and so it starts all over again.
They're just milking the cash cow continually, aren't they?
Yes, and of course, if somebody would get abdominal pain from appendicitis, they go into the hospital and they get an appendectomy, and they're cured and they're on their way. If somebody gets a kidney transplant, it's as one person who got a kidney expressed it, it's an exchange of one set of problems for another set of problems, but it isn't that cure that happens when you get an appendectomy.
Another thing also is I've heard that the federal government actually owns your physical body according to many of these treaties and bills, and Wall Street's involved. Is there any connection there?
Of course. They don't own it like you have a certificate of ownership, title, or whatever it is to your car or whatever else it might be like that. They don't own it in that way, but the way they own it is through the laws, and the law for the determination of death is just put over on the people. The people, everybody knows what it is to be alive, and everybody knows what death is. How do they know it? They know it because when they played with the caterpillar when they were a kid, the caterpillar, when the caterpillar died, they knew that. They're goldfish that did swim around, stopped swimming around, and then they're on their side floating. They know what death is. Grandma or grandpa dies. They know what death is. So they think that's what death is, and then they think the laws are set up to make it would be that way when you become dead. But no, the laws are set up to make you dead when you have a beating heart, circulation, respiration, and other things that are all part of being alive but they call you dead so they can get your organs. So that's the first set of laws. Then the next set of laws are the ones to get your organs. And the set of laws to get your organs are called anatomical gift acts. And again, it's a play on words because in order to give something, you have to own it, kind of thing. And we don't really own ourselves. We are here and we have to take care of ourselves, but not in just ownership. But the law says Anatomical Gift Act, and the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act has already been passed in 47 states. And it makes it so it presumes that you are an organ donor. It presumes that everyone is an organ donor. Furthermore, it presumes that you've consented to every test being done to you to determine if your organs are good for someone else. And then it further presumes that you've consented to have everything done to you to keep your organs in good shape until they can find someone to give them to. That's called the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act. And I live in Ohio, and I think you're in Illinois. But wherever you are, the odds are you're in a state, and I'm in a state that already has the Anatomical Gift Act, and it presumes that everyone is an organ donor. And when you go to the License Bureau and they ask you, do you wish to be an organ donor? And most people say yes or say no to that with little or no information. They might quickly rationalize, well, when I'm dead, you can have my organs. The answer is no. When you're dead, your organs are no good for transplant. You must be alive, but they don't tell you that. If you say yes, it makes it easier to get your organs, and that does get recorded on your license, on your driver's license. Sometimes it'll be a heart, sometimes it'll be some other indication that you're an organ donor. But if you say no, that does not get recorded any place. No place. That doesn't go on your license at all. The no just goes out in the netherworld somewhere, but it does not record it. It does not get recorded. The only thing that gets recorded is the yes to be an organ donor. The Anatomical Gift Act does give a way that you can document that you do not want to be an organ donor, but you have to document it. And they give you, no state, so far as I know, gives you a way to document that you don't want to be an organ donor. We do give you a way to document that you do not want to be an organ donor. And we have cards that we give out. They're medical cards to protect and preserve your life. You can get them by getting the information on our website, www.lifeguardianfoundation.org. And you can get the medical cards. You have to sign, and you have to get somebody to witness them. But you have to do it. And I say it like that because the people who are listening, they need to do something to protect and preserve your life. And especially the young people, the younger people, they'll take organs from anybody. The oldest donor that I've heard about it was 91. They'll take organs from anybody, but the ones that they want especially, and the ones whose lives are in jeopardy, are the young people, 18 to 40, especially 18 to 30. The other thing that I've learned from doing this, people get in touch with me when their 18 or 19-year-old son has been injured, and then they get in touch with me, and then I find out, and the parents find out too, that once you become an adult, 18 and over, you must have a power of attorney for someone to speak for you. It's no longer your mother or your father like it was when you were less than 18. So you have to have power of attorney to speak for you, or else what happens is that it goes into the court system, and then the court will appoint a guardian who is another attorney. And of course, if they are part of the system to get organs, your organs are going to be gone, and there isn't any way anybody can do anything to stop that. And so So the other things that we give out, of course, is that we give out booklets to educate people that they can read them. But the people have to get themselves educated. They have to understand what this is about. And from my own vantage point, I didn't start to study this subject or become involved with it to be in opposition to organ transplants. My goal and objective was to study the question, is brain death true death? And it's not. Brain death is fake death. And it's just made up. Main reason is to get organs. Second thing that happens, though, is that they don't want to treat people who are very sick, and maybe the odds might be that they will not get completely well like they were before, or whatever that is, and so they end up with less treatment. So in any event, everybody needs to learn about these things. You need to do something about it. You need to document that you don't want to be an organ donor, and at the same time, the card also documents that you want to be treated. And I think that most people want to be treated. But what happens is that if somebody is unconscious and on a ventilator, and they are between 18 and 30 or 18 and 40, the goal and objective is to get your organs. And yes, the treatment for keeping somebody in good shape and healthy is the same as the treatment for keeping organs in good shape and healthy. And so the treatments are the same, but quickly if it becomes that it looks like somebody's not going to get better quickly or that kind of thing, then they go in the direction of getting the organs. So, and it starts right at the scene of the accident. By radio and other things that go on with communication, they decide which hospital that you go to. And the level 1 trauma centers are also the organ transplantation centers. And so the people with the more serious injuries go to the hospitals that can take care of serious injuries, but those are also the hospitals where transplantation occurs.
Do they ever use intimidation tactics on people? Let's say that you take somebody to the hospital because they get in this serious car accident. So they come out and say, well, this person probably is going to make it. You know, we need to make sure to get their organs ready or something, or just try and give you some excuse as to let them go. We're going to chop them up and sell them.
Of course they do. And fact of the matter is, they have designated people who know how to say things, so that that's more likely that they're going to get organs. Your son very likely is not going to get well, and if he does, he will be whatever words they attach to that, being a vegetable or whatever words. And incidentally, a human being is never a squash or a string bean. A human being is always a person, even when they have serious injury. They're still persons and never a vegetable. That's a degrading term and should not be applied to human persons ever. But they will use those kinds of tactics, and when there is a serious injury like that, the family is overwhelmed, and they go to hospitals thinking that they're going to get treatment, but the goal and objective is to get organs, especially if you're young. And at this time, I have a little girl in Richmond, Virginia, who choked on popcorn on May the 11th, and since that time, the goal and objective is first to get her organs. If we can't get her organs, make her become dead. And so her mother and father and I help them to protect and preserve the life of the little girl. But the little girl's in the hospital in Richmond, Virginia. She's hypothyroid. They won't give her thyroid. She needs a tracheostomy. They won't do a tracheostomy. She needs a feeding tube. They won't give her a feeding tube. And why? Because they want her to be dead. They first wanted her organs. When her parents said no, then they embark on saying, okay, stop the life-sustaining treatment. And she continues to live with on the ventilator, but the hospital admits she's hypothyroid, but they won't give her thyroid. They won't even test for thyroid. And you know, they did blood counts on a regular basis. And about a month ago, they decided they wouldn't do any more blood counts. So she just gets anemic. They won't do even a simple blood count on her because it can show that she's anemic and needs a blood transfusion. They don't want to do that. They want her to be dead. She's not the only one. Israel Stinson was in California, a little boy who got asthma attack on the 1st of April, and they wanted his organs, and his mother and father said no to that. So then they embarked on wanting to stop his treatment. It eventually became that he was in the hospital in California for more than a month with no nutrition. They wouldn't give him any nutrition. They gave him sugar water in the vein, but that's all. No protein, no fat, no vitamins, you know, for more than a month because they wanted him dead. We had to transfer him to Guatemala to get a tracheostomy and a feeding tube and to get some nutrition. He went there very sick. We had a hard time getting him back in the country because nobody would take him back. And somehow or another, he is now back in the country, but again, they're embarking on calling him brain dead, and so that because they don't want to treat him. He's very much alive. He's on minimum medicine. He did get thyroid once he got to Guatemala. He had to go to a developing country to get treated. He's back in our country. I really don't know what's going to happen. Who pays for things, and of course the Medicare and Medicaid is the government way of paying, and basically they said if they conclude just like it was before he left, there won't be any payment for him, and there won't be anything that can be done. That kind of thing, and these that I mentioned are not the only ones, but there's others that Jahai McMath was a 13-year-old girl, and in December of 2013 had tonsil surgery and then had some bleeding and hemorrhage, and they said she was brain dead. They wanted her organs, and her mother said no, and then they said, well, we're going to stop treating her, so we get involved with treating her. She had to be transferred from California to New Jersey. Since she's been in New Jersey, she's had her 14th birthday. She's had her 15th birthday. She lives in New Jersey, but she has a death certificate in California. And she can't go back to California because the insurance company won't pay for her in California because she's dead in California. But she gets paid for in New Jersey because she's alive in New Jersey. And all of these things are going on. They're all interrelated to each other. Most everybody thinks everything's great in our country, and because they get health care and they're healthy. And yes, we do have lots and lots of nice things, good things that go on in our country. But we have a system that's set up that if you're weak and unconscious, then the system says we want your organs because we want them for someone who is more entitled to your organs than what you're entitled than what you are. And then we want to get them, and it's a big business to get your organs. And so these other ones, let me tell you, the little girl in Richmond, Virginia, a 2-year-old girl chokes on popcorn. Not only will they not give her thyroid, they won't do a blood count, they won't do a tracheostomy, they won't give her a feeding tube, but they won't even let her mother lay down in a bed next to her because they want her so much to be dead. And these things are going on. I wouldn't be telling you or whoever is listening if you didn't give me a chance. But these are the kinds of patients that I work with, and I try to help. They continue to live, and the golden objective, my golden objective, is to get the truth out about the fake death of brain death. But then it's also to find better ways to treat these patients, because you see what happens when the brain swells then it stops making that part of the brain that makes the thyroid-releasing hormone to affect the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland doesn't make then the thyroid-stimulating hormone, which makes the thyroid to function. And what happens when the thyroid doesn't function, then the body swells. So the way it is that the brain swells from whatever it is that started, lack of oxygen or injury or whatever it is, and then there's further swelling from the hypothyroidism, and so the idea is to make that diagnosis, give them thyroid hormone, reduce the swelling of the brain, and then improve, and then give them nutrition that helps the brain to heal. The vitamins, the riboflavin, and the proteins that are necessary for the brain to heal. So my goal and objective is to not only stand for the life of the unconscious comatose patient, but to protect and preserve their life and find a better way to treat them. And in some ways, it's not different, not a whole lot different from what it was with the situation with premature babies when I started. Many babies died and there weren't any treatments. And some ways it's similar to that. People with injury to their brain, of course it's serious, and they do die, but many of them have the death imposed by having their organs cut out or by not getting treated in a way to protect and preserve their life. So anyway, it's what I do, and if you and I weren't talking to each other, I would be doing what I do at my computer to help these patients or going to see them or whatever it is that's necessary to try to help them.
You know, Dr. Byrne, I can certainly tell that you are genuine and passionate about this, and I applaud you for it, and I know that our listeners will as well that have a chance to listen to this podcast here at the Leak Project. One of the things that I've noticed, this is going to be a bit off topic, but I think it's related, and before I go on this little rant, how long have you been a doctor?
I graduated from medical school in 1957.
Okay, so
you can
yeah
put the years together. It's about 59.
Okay.
More than 50 years, yeah.
Wow. Okay, so over that course of time, have you noticed that the industry itself has just flipped upside down and now it should be called death care, not health care?
Correct. That's correct.
There's some great doctors out there still.
Lots of doctors are good doctors, but and incidentally, I encourage you to use this term, and I call it a system of death, and because see, care is a special word, and death care is not quite there. So
it's an oxymoron.
Come up with a system of death, yes, and then and of course, how did I get to the system of death? Well, there's such a thing as a culture of death, and culture is like cultivate. It's what you make it. And while the culture of death has been invented and developed over the years that I've been a physician, but it's invented and developed to the point where it's a system of death. The system of death is run by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And the Secretary of Health and Human Services is the one who issues the rules and regulations for Medicare and then for Medicaid. And then the private insurance companies follow the same rules, and that determines on who gets treatment and how much treatment that you get. And then the laws are all set up so that they often are not there to help you to get well. The money gets involved. What you have is in the system of death, and the system of death as it currently exists is altogether different than it was when I graduated from medical school and how we learned medicine. We learned medicine that the sickest patients were the ones who got the most attention, and the sickest patients were the ones that we worked the hardest to figure out what was wrong with them and then to find a treatment for them. Now, when you get very sick, what do they do with you? They send you off to hospice, or they give you palliative care. It's altogether different. So the sickest patients end up with getting off the earth more quickly. has medicine changed? It certainly has. And as one doctor said, it's downside up. And I said to him, "Don't you mean upside down?" And he said, "I know what I'm talking about." It's like that. It's different from the way that I learned medicine, the way that medicine was, and trying to put a sense of time as to when things changed. I told you that the first heart transplant was at the end of 1967, and that brain death was invented in 1968 and then legalized in 70. So they legalized the cutting out of the beating heart of a 20-year-old young man in Kansas in 1970, and it spread across the country. Well, if you can do that to somebody who's a young man or a young lady, then why can't you kill the unborn baby? And of course, Roe v. Wade legalized abortion throughout the entire 9 months of pregnancy, and whatever restrictions are on there, there's very few. So you see, it's a culture of death that does not protect and preserve the life of the unborn baby, does not protect and preserve the life of the person with a head injury, does not protect and preserve the life of the infant with severe abnormalities, that kind of thing. And so it goes across the board, and Life Guardian Foundation, we protect and preserve life from conception until true death, and we don't have any exceptions. Yes, the medical world is a lot different. So far as doctors are concerned, the world is different, but I think a lot of doctors get into medicine to trying to do something to help their fellow man, their fellow person on earth. But what happens is that either you become part of the system or you become ostracized. Like the patients that I told you about. I told you about Jahai in California, Aiden Halou in Nevada. I have doctors. Those patients need a tracheostomy, but no one will do them. And I have doctors tell me, "Paul, I agree with what you want to do, but I can't stand the pressure from my peers if I would do that." And that kind of thing. I mean, they come right out and they tell me. I have doctors that are practically in tears because they know the patients need the treatment, but they can't stand up against their peers to go ahead and do that. Israel Stinson was in Guatemala. I have a doctor in Philadelphia who agreed to take him, but then as he talks to the hospital administrators and the other doctors, they say, "Oh no, you better not have him come here," and so you can't get him any place. Anyway, we keep on to do what we can, so we encourage people to go to our website, www.lifeguardianfoundation.org, and read what's there, and read what's there. Get in touch with us. We'll send you the medical cards. We send you the booklets, if any other way you want to join with us to help us, we're happy to do that. The issues also dovetail into palliative care, palliative care within the last year or so. There were 2 new codes added to Medicare, and the new codes were for counseling, that your doctor can counsel you on how to get less treatment. And if you don't want to go along with that, he can have you come back for another visit for counseling. And the new codes were to make it so that your own doctor can counsel you on having some kind of a form or something so that you will get less treatment. And so these things are all going on in the system of death. The doctors now, instead of paying attention to you when he sees you, he has his computer, and he knows that he has to push a certain number of buttons and put in a certain number of X's, or he won't get paid. He knows that. And so in order to continue to make a living, he has to pay more attention to the computer than he does to you. It didn't all start yesterday. It's been going on, and it will continue to go on. And so, what do we do about it? I encourage people to pray and to pay attention to your friends and relatives, pay attention to your neighbors, because that's where your strength is going to have to be as this all continues to progress. So I encourage you to realize what's happening, and I'm not against doctors, and I'm not against medicine, and there's a lot of things in medicine that are exciting. The images, the CAT scans, the MRIs. We can do so much to make diagnosis now that we couldn't do at all when I graduated from medical school, and it's very exciting. But it seems to me that if you have something and they can't figure it out, they don't spend a lot of time continuing to try to figure that out. And if you have something that's really serious, you probably ought to go to hospice. And then one of my daughters is a stockbroker, and she called me one day and said, "Dad, did you know that many hospice companies are stock companies?" And that's how I found out that they're stock companies, and they sell stock. And so how does a company make money? They make money with rapid turnover. So how do you make money in hospice? Don't stay in there very long and have rapid turnover and that kind of thing. And like I told you, when I started to do this, it was as a neonatologist, then to figure out what there is with brain death, then brain death and organ transplants. And then I realized that the system of death is built in there so that if you get very sick, you don't stay on the earth very long. And they find ways, like one of my friends who did not have a lethal illness, and she was 94, and then she didn't have a lethal illness. That actually she fell, didn't injure herself seriously, but did end up in the hospital, and then she had a bladder infection, and so the treatment was Ativan, which confuses the mind, and morphine, which depresses the everything, and it was Ativan and morphine until she was dead in about 6 days. And I mean, this is what's going on. Most people don't pay any attention. Now, granted, I didn't want my friend to, if you want to call it, suffer, but she didn't have pain. The one day before I had to go out of town, I spent the whole morning, much of the day, from 8 o'clock in the morning till 2 o'clock in the afternoon with her. She didn't have any pain, and she didn't need anything for pain. She did need somebody to help her get a drink and to do other things. But while I was out of town, someone made the decision that it was time for her to get hospice, which she got. And then when I came back, Ativan and morphine, and all I could say is, why? She didn't need either one of them. And there was only one thing that was going to happen to her, and she became dead. But she had a relative who had power of attorney. Do I think people need power of attorney? Of course they do. But make sure that the power of attorney loves you and that they don't love to get rid of you. You want the power of attorney to protect and preserve your life. But even if you have that, the system of death is, I don't know that they can stand up against it as it continues to come on. Medicine's exciting. Get excited about it, but realize that there's a lot of things going on that aren't always good for you. What can you do about it? First of all, don't be an organ donor. And I need to mention that when you become unconscious and on a ventilator, the way they determine this brain death thing is that somebody is in a coma, unconscious, and they shine a light in the eye and the pupil doesn't respond. And then what they do is an apnea test. And the apnea test is not a test for sleep apnea. The apnea test is a test where they take the life-sustaining ventilator away, not for a minute, not for 2 minutes, not for 5 minutes, but for 10 minutes. They take it away for 10 minutes, and that makes the carbon dioxide go up and makes the body get acidotic, and that makes the brain swell, and they get worse. And everybody needs to know, no to the apnea test. No one should ever get an apnea test. It's a wrong kind of test to do, and yet that's the test that they do to put the final thing on so far as the fake death or brain death. If they take the ventilator away and you can't show that you can take a breath, then that's a signal to get your organs taken out. And of course, they're doing this kind of testing right after the injury, or they're doing it while they're hypothyroid. The person doesn't have a chance to show that they can take a breath. And that's the test that makes the final thing so far as the declaration of brain death is concerned. And so, yes, the listeners need to learn these things, go to our website, read about them, do something to protect and preserve their own life, get the medical cards that we provide, and the cards say that you want to be treated. And they say, don't do an apnea test. They say, don't take your organs for transplantation. And it's pretty simple, but it's what you have to do to protect your life. And there's also other things in there. We're not attorneys, but we do have models for power of attorney that you can designate someone to speak for you when you can't speak for yourself. But that someone should just be able to protect and preserve your life. That someone should not be able to do something to hasten your death or to cause your death. So somewhere in there, I might have stimulated you to ask another question.
Indeed you have, and you just got a fantastic website, lifeguardianfoundation.org. There's so much powerful information on the website, and what you've been bringing to the table is just incredible. People really need to be aware of this kind of stuff, yet these are the things that are most often not discussed as what's most important. Now, I'm looking at a couple articles, and I want to ask you a couple questions that are a little bit off topic, but I think also a part of this system of death that seems to have usurped up the majority of the medical industry and just kind of turned into the Borg. It's assimilating everything. There was an article that I recently read by Erin Elizabeth, and you can read this on healthnutnews.com, about how over 50 doctors, they're all holistic doctors, have been killed or died or suicided, very mysterious circumstances over a short period of time. And the information that these guys are coming out with, and gals, are oftentimes, it'll be something about a vaccine and how it blocks vitamin D production, or how certain chemicals and specific big pharma type stuff is really bad for people, and just smoking gun type stuff, and then 2 days later they're dead, or they end up in a car accident, or they shoot themselves in the back of the head with a shotgun because they're depressed, supposedly. And I'm being sarcastic here. It's horrible what's happening to these people. What do you think about that kind of stuff?
Well, assuming it's true, that's awful. And obviously, the holistic medicine is sometimes not looked at squarely enough as it should be. The vaccines, it's just amazing to me. One of the vaccines that they do to little babies is a hepatitis B vaccine.
Thank you for bringing this up.
Hepatitis B, hepatitis B is a serious problem, but you get it from a blood transfusion. But of course, the blood is screened, so you're not going to get it from that anymore. You get it from sexual promiscuity, multiple sexual partners. And the IV drug users, the addicts, they get hepatitis B, but newborn babies don't get hepatitis B, and yet they insist on giving that vaccine to every newborn baby. And then if you're a doctor like me, who did not want to do that, then they keep records on you as being uncooperative, that kind of thing. And of course the vaccines that are out there, like the chickenpox vaccine and the shingles vaccine, it's made from aborted babies. I'm never going to take that vaccine. I don't want to get sick. I won't get chickenpox anymore, but I don't want to get shingles. Hepatitis A, it's made from aborted babies. I went out of the country, went to a country that had a problem with that. It's recommended to take hepatitis A. vaccine. I'm not going to take hepatitis A vaccine. I'm not going to take a vaccine made from aborted babies. I want to live as long as I can, but I'm not going to participate in those kinds of things. And if you ask most people, do you know that the shingles vaccine is made from aborted babies? Most people don't know that. So
don't say you're a conspiracy theorist if you tell them, though. They won't believe you. Even if you show them the insert, because I've read it, I've seen the insert. You're absolutely right, 100% correct. But you could even show people the insert, and you get this cognitive dissonance. I didn't mean to interrupt. It's just so amazing how hypnotized people are when it comes to vaccines.
Yes, and see, it has to do with things with how we reason, and then how do we come to conclusion? What is the evidence, and what is this about? And of course, that's really what's happening to us when we're little babies, and with our mothers and fathers are teaching us things. And then what happens is we get away from them. Then we get into an educational system, and then who knows what happens with our basic ability to reason. And then we are like we are, and people think that the things that we're talking about, those are somebody else's problems. Those are problems for all of us. And the people have to search for the truth. They have to learn the truth, and they have to hold on to the truth. The truth won't ever change, and the truth is easy. It's the falseness, like the brain death is false. The truth about life and death is easy. Brain death is false, and so in order to learn about it, I had to learn how to untell the lies, and that's really what it is. And it's the same way with the vaccines. The flu vaccine, they make it so that if you're a doctor or a nurse, you can't keep working in this hospital because we won't allow you to work unless you take the flu vaccine. I've never taken the flu vaccine, and if I have my way, I will never take it. I lived through the flu epidemic in 1957, 58 when it was, and yes, the flu can be serious, but serious for the people who have some altered immunity. But for the rest of the people, it's not such a serious disease. And so, but it's the way that they sell lots of vaccines. And then what occurs at the end of every year, they say, well, the flu vaccine wasn't very effective, and that kind of thing. But yes, there is a problem with vaccines, and yes, we do need to educate ourselves. We should be able to trust the medical profession, but the medical profession is such that it's all organized. I really don't think doctors ought to be employed by anybody other than the patient.
Nice.
I don't think they ought to be employed by a hospital. I don't think they ought to be employed by the government. They ought to be employed by patients, because that's who we should owe something to, is to our patients. But on the other hand, in order to be a neonatologist, I had to be employed by a hospital because of working in the hospital. So, but for 20 years, I did private practice where I just did things with my patients, and so I know the difference between being employed, and that kind of thing. So the system is to control the doctors, control the medicine, and what the system should be is to protect and preserve the life of persons.
Absolutely. And you bring up the vaccines. I'm so glad we're talking about this now. There are 49 doses of 14 vaccines that the CDC recommends you give your child by the age of 6. Now, the other day I went to the CDC's website. I looked at the different inserts from the different vaccines. I looked at the ingredients. And I got to tell you, every single vaccine that I looked at, except for a couple of the ones that you take orally, not only do they have aluminum in them, formaldehyde. You also brought up the aborted fetus cells. They're actually genetically modified. They're altered now in the Hep vax. and they give them to babies, literally directly injecting formaldehyde and aluminum. And don't forget the thimerosal in a couple of them. They don't put as much thimerosal in them anymore, though. But all the other stuff is just, you don't even want to eat that stuff as an adult. Why would you put it directly in your blood or give it to your baby? But people don't realize this kind of stuff, and they're so conditioned from birth. Oh, well, it got rid of smallpox. It got rid of polio. Well, how about those 100 million people that got infected with the cancer virus because of that polio vaccine actually had a cancer virus in it? And they don't realize this kind of stuff. There's neurological disorders now are far beyond what they were 50 years ago, aren't they?
Yes, and there are things that are there now, like autism. Autism. I don't want to say it didn't exist when I was a much younger doctor, but it was practically non-existent. And now many babies are affected with autism, and they say the cause isn't known, and they deny that it has to do with vaccines, although everybody won't go along with that. But we're doing something that makes children get autism now that they did not get 20 years ago. And so there's something going on, and of course the vaccines. And then you mentioned the thimerosal, and there's still some, but it's not enough that they have to put it on the label, that kind of thing. So you have to be careful with that. And then if the multi-dose vials, then it costs much less to use a multi-dose vial. So almost all of them have mercury or other preservatives in them.
And they say that there's no preservatives. It's crazy. They'll say no preservatives, yet you can read right before they say no preservatives. You can read half of the preservatives they put in there. The other half, like you said, there's small amounts. They don't even have to label it. How do they get away with it? It's crazy.
Yes, it is. But you know whose fault it is, don't you? It's the doctor's fault. I mean, I don't mean to be dumping on myself as a doctor, but it's my own fault that I didn't stand up more. I stand up as much as I can now for lots of things, but it's all of our faults. And of course, what happens, the system is such that the doctors still make a good salary. If ever it gets to where the doctor's salary is involved, then maybe the doctor will catch on more, that kind of thing. And I'm not anti-doctor. I mean, I'm a doctor. My friends are doctors. I'm not anti-medicine. Medicine is good, but we have to find a way that we protect and preserve the life of persons, and we don't need to go along with everything. We don't need to be giving all these vaccines. Certainly, just to start out with the first one, with the hepatitis B vaccine, I worked in the hospital and with premature babies and the like, so I just wouldn't give it. I'd find some reason not to give it, but I'm sure that the government kept track of those things and that kind of thing.
You will assimilate.
They're trying to take people like yourself and use things against you and then threaten you and then keep tabs on you. It's like you're looked at as the criminal when you're trying to save people.
Yes, that kind of thing. You'd be surprised. The things they give as reasons why they shouldn't pay attention to me. But I don't pay much attention to it because I stay focused on the truth, and not that I think I can't make a mistake. Of course I can. But when you have the truth and then you base it on the evidence, and then you base it on what is sound, and then you have a solid way to reason, then the truth is there, and the truth prevails, and the truth will set you free. And so I just keep on. I don't pay much attention to whatever anybody says. I would like to be the most popular person in the world, but on the other hand, I am what I am, trying to stay focused on the truth. And in early on with neonatology, it was to find better ways to diagnose and to treat babies, and I did that for a number of years, and God was good to me to help with the invention of how to take blood pressure. We invented an incubator. I have my picture in the Encyclopedia Americana, the 1963 or the 1973 edition of that annual edition of the Encyclopedia Americana, for an incubator monitor that we invented. And so yes, God was good to me to let me do those kinds of things. And yes, the issue of brain death comes up. Brain death is not true death; it's fake death, and much of the system of death revolves around brain death and organ transplants. So anyway, what you do with education of people, I encourage you to continue that, so one other thing that I need to mention is about the ventilator, and the machine that we use to help people to breathe is a ventilator, and a lot of people call it a respirator. But ventilator and respirator, they're two different words. The ventilator just moves air. There is no such thing as a respirator. Respirator would be to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. But a ventilator just moves air, and so far as the piece of equipment that's used for supporting breathing in a patient with a head injury, the only thing that the ventilator does is pushes the air in. That's all it does. It's just the living person who pushes it out. And then the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide occurs in the healthy lungs, and occurs only because there is a beating heart and circulation. The ventilator only works in the living person. It cannot work on a cadaver. And even the breathing cycle, which is to go in and then to come out, it only supplements the cycle in. It doesn't even push it out. The way that our bodies are made is that the lungs and the chest wall, when they expand, they store energy, and then that stored energy is what's used to push the air out. The stored energy, it's you can understand about stored energy if you think of the rubber band. The rubber band that's laying on the desk isn't doing anything. You pick it up, you stretch it, and then it contracts and gets smaller. But it does that because our stretching puts energy into the rubber band, which it can then contract, and elastic properties makes it get smaller. That's the way that we breathe. That we breathe by the muscles of our chest and diaphragm contracting, making our chest get bigger and air going in, and then the energy is stored and it automatically goes out. When somebody's on a ventilator, the ventilator pushes the air in, but then it's the living, healthy lungs and chest wall that pushes the air out, and then the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide takes place in the healthy lungs and takes place because of the circulation that's happening because the heart is beating and there's circulation. So the ventilator is the proper name, not respirator, and then the ventilator only works in the living person. If it is working, that's a living person. The ventilator won't work in a cadaver, so that's another important point for people to learn. Ventilator, know what it is. It's a tremendous piece of equipment. That's another thing. Some people say, "Oh, I never want to be on a ventilator. I never want to be on a respirator." Well, that's nonsense, is what I would say. They can say that, but they don't understand the ventilator like I understand the ventilator. Of course, we all want to breathe without a ventilator, but sometimes somebody gets sick and they need a ventilator. And the new ventilators are so nice and so soft and gentle and easy to use, and they're very effective. And oftentimes we can use them for a short period of time, a day or 2 days, and get off of them. But if we don't get them, we don't do so well. So people should realize the ventilator is a piece of equipment that is very helpful with some patients, and so if you can always say, "I don't want one," but if you need one, then you ought to get it, and you want it done in the very best way, and that means you need a doctor that's knowledgeable on the use of the ventilator to use it for whatever period of time he or she needs it, and then get off of it. But the ventilator is improperly called a respirator, but it just moves air in. That's all it does. The rest of it works because it is being done on a living, healthy person.
You know, I got to tell you, this information that you brought to the table is just so vital, and there's not a whole lot of people discussing this kind of stuff. So, Dr. Byrne, you are a real inspiration. I feel honored to have spoken with you, and I know our audience will also. The world needs more people like you. Thank you very much for spending time with us here at Leap Project. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure to go to lifeguardianfoundation.org for more information about Dr. Byrne and the harvesters of organs. Thank you for everything, Dr. Byrne. I hope I have the opportunity to speak with you again sometime.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Perhaps your listeners will encourage you to invite me back sometime.
Oh, I'm definitely already got you on the calendar, so we're going to get in touch again soon. You're also going to have your own page on the Leak Project, so more people can get this information. And yeah, this is serious stuff. So yeah, this one more thing I want to say before we close out tonight. You brought up the term, the Anatomical Gift Act. That reminds me, it sounds good, right? You're like, oh, gee, a gift, that's great. We need gifts. And then I think of how the government and corporations are so good at spinning words to try and sell their products and market it and package it a certain way. It reminds me of when a bill was passed in 2011. I actually read the bill at the whitehouse.gov website. And when they passed the bill, it was called the Peacetime Martial Law Bill. They changed the name a few days later. If you read the bill, it just basically said in times of war, the government could take your food, your cars, your transportation. They could tell you where to work and what to do and essentially everything else. And, but they packaged it as, oh, it's a peacetime martial law bill. It's a good thing. So, but in reality, it could be something where if you had a business and you had 40 cars and they needed those cars, they could use that for their own agenda. So it's just fascinating the way that they put these things together. And once you read the fine print, it really becomes that the truth can come out there more. So thank you so much. And you have a fantastic day.
You too. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I'm your host, Rex Bear, and tonight's guest is Dr. Paul Byrne. Dr. Paul Byrne is just a bounty of knowledge. He has an amazing website called the lifeguardianfoundation.org. And what we discuss in this podcast is very powerful information that Big Pharma and the medical industrial complex does their very best to suppress. He talks about different terms that have been created by the medical industrial complex to get people's organs when they're still alive. Make sure to check out lifeguardianfoundation.org. Also subscribe to youtube.com/clandestine Time Lord. You'll get access to a bounty of podcasts as well. Go to leakproject.com, become a member of Leak Project, get access to exclusive content. Be the change you want to see. This is Rex Bear. Talk to you soon. Well, folks, we have a real treat for you tonight. We have Dr. Paul A. Byrne with us from lifeguardianfoundation.org. Dr. Byrne, it's a real honor to speak with you today here at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
I am fine. Glad to speak with you.
It's great to speak with you, too. Now, I've had several guests that I've spoken to before that have kind of hinted on this subject, but you are the expert, and I really want to hear what we can do to protect ourselves. Now, I have also heard of there being some very powerful people that kind of have like a catalog of sorts where they can look through, and if they need an organ or if they need blood or something, they can pick and choose from these like basically clandestine files that they pay big bucks for. Have you ever found anything like that to be accurate, or is that more internet woo-woo?
Well, I don't really hear too much about that. And while I hear it from you now, I really don't put much credibility to it. And so, part of why I do not is that the first thing, in order to get an organ for transplantation, it has to be a healthy organ. It cannot come from a cadaver. And the organ has to continue to be healthy during the time that they're operating to take it out, during the time that they have it out, until it gets into someone else. And so there are many, many things that can damage the organ during that time. And so when you start thinking about all of that, how much care and concern there has to be to take care of the donor, to take care of the organ, before it's taken out of the living person than to keep it healthy until they get it into another living person. And so to do this in such a way that it would be clandestine does really not make a whole lot of sense to me. But on the other hand, a lot of things happen, and so perhaps it goes on. While that could be very, very important, what's going on that's more important is the organ transplant industry that is thriving and just moving along very well in the United States, all over the world, really. And so ordinary folks need to know how it affects them, or how it possibly affects them or affects their family. So I tend to stay focused on what's really happening to everyone, whether they're aware of it or not, and not pay too much attention to some of those other things that we might hear about.
Well, I can certainly appreciate that, and that's one thing I bring up many times on the Leak Project is the internet's like a bathroom wall, but worse. You can write anything about anyone on there. But I'm looking at an article from 2009, actually, that came out on Newsweek that says organ trafficking is no myth. And you've heard the urban legends, I'm sure, where somebody goes out to a bar, they wake up in a bathtub with a bunch of ice and one of their kidneys is missing or something. And I've thought to myself, man, that's got to be really, I don't know, but there's some crazy people out there. But let's get into the meat and the potatoes and the real situation here with these organ companies that just probably make tremendous amounts of money and find ways to manipulate the situation to get more profits.
Yes. Well, before you go away from that scenario about getting intoxicated, you didn't use quite the words, but you said going to a bar, and then waking up in a bathtub full of ice and minus a kidney. I think that's right next to BS. That the kidneys are not just lying there underneath the skin, waiting for somebody's hand to reach in and pick it out.
Right.
And in order to get that kidney out, it has to be dissected. It has a blood supply with arteries. If you can just, even for a tiny, tiny little bit, imagine maybe even a garden hose or that would get away from someone, how it might flop around and lots of water pour out of it, but quit and hurry. How about if you got a heart pumping that blood? And so to dissect the artery and the vein and the ureter, that's pretty sophisticated kind of dissection. And I'm just not impressed with stories about how that gets done on somebody's kitchen table or something. But on the other hand, I have so many things that I have to pay attention to, but I'm just I don't know where those stories start from. Maybe they're true, but on the other hand, I'm skeptical of the truth of those kind of stories. But anyway, let's go ahead with the things that we do have to deal with. Yes, organ transplant industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's completely dependent on getting healthy organs. And where do they get healthy organs? They get healthy organs from living persons. Can they get healthy organs from a cadaver? No. The donor must be alive. Every organ that's transplanted is a healthy organ and it comes from a living person. And then to distinguish just a little bit, there is a bit of difference between organs and tissues, and the organs carry out a function and they have to have a continual blood supply. Tissues are such that some of them do not require that same kind of blood supply, like the cornea, the front part of the eye. Fact is, the cornea, the front part of the eye, doesn't have a blood supply. It gets its oxygen through the tears from the environment. So one can see that after circulation has stopped, the cornea doesn't deteriorate immediately. It takes a longer time. Like the heart without circulation deteriorates in 4 or 5 minutes, whereas the cornea can take several hours. So they can get the cornea for transplantation after circulation has stopped. They get other things like ligaments and tendons. You can readily understand that ligaments and tendons need oxygen, but they don't have that continual supply of oxygen, and so they can get, and those would be tissues, not organs. And the organs that are transplanted are heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, pancreas, intestine. All of those are organs that need a continual supply of oxygen, and so they have to get them from living persons. When they first started to do transplantation, they focused on hearts early. It wasn't the earliest, but they focused on hearts, and they tried to get heart for transplantation after circulation stopped, after death. And they quickly learned that it wasn't successful. They couldn't do it. So there was a doctor, Christian Bernard, who was a bit more aggressive, trained in the United States, and then went back to Johannesburg. And his going away present when he left the United States was a heart-lung machine. And so he wanted to do a heart transplant. Doctors here in the United States wanted to do it too. But Christian Bernard did the first heart transplant in December of 1967. And there was much publicity. He attained great notoriety over it, and did the heart transplant, and got it from a person that he would like to say quickly after death, but one has to realize that the heart without circulation, just 4 or 5 minutes, is so damaged that it isn't good for transplantation quickly. So then to get to the heart and take it out, it takes about an hour of operating. So he had to have everything opened up, ready to lift the heart out, and did whatever he did. And so the word went around the world, the news around the world, that the first heart transplant had been done. Well, the second heart transplant was done 3 days later, and it was done in Brooklyn, New York. And what they did in Brooklyn, New York, is they cut the beating heart out of a 3-day-old baby who was said to have mental retardation, and transplanted it into an 18-day-old baby who had something wrong with the heart, but the brain was okay, and so they determined was more entitled to a heart than the infant with mental retardation. So they transplanted the heart, and at the end of their procedures, both babies were dead. It was illegal and it was immoral, and so they had to find a way to get hearts for transplant. So what they did is they set up a committee at Harvard. And the Harvard committee set up what's known as the Harvard criteria, and for brain death, and they published it in 1968. Within a few months of those first heart transplants, published it in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And the title of the article was "A Definition of Irreversible Coma." Now, coma is a word that's spelled pretty close to the word comma, and comma as a punctuation means a pause. Coma is like that too. It's somebody who's unconscious, unresponsive, but they're not dead. They're alive. If they were dead, they would just call them dead. So a definition of irreversible coma, and it was new in medicine in the United States. And the way we doctors make inventions and progress in medicine is that we do things in the laboratory, in the chemistry laboratory or biology laboratory, and then we use dogs or cats or rats to evaluate treatment before we use them on human beings. And then when we do use them on human beings, we use them on a small number of human beings to determine the effect